That's where I think the Iraq War has failed miserably, is that democracy is not just about elections, it's about institutions, it's about civil liberties, it's about all of these good education, good infrastructure. That was not, and that was not built, even though some may argue that was the intention of the war, but as you dig in more and you see the corruption between the contractors and the other contractors, and suddenly just the money disappears for some reason, which was all meant for kind of rebuilding institutions. I struggle with these questions. I don't really have the best answer to them, but I think is that it all depends what you value. If what you value, for example, what I value is, for example, freedom of information. Yes, Iraq is doing much better in terms of freedom of information. They have much more accessibility to information. So if you want to democratize or move society to become more accepting of enlightenment values or any values that you like to promote, Iraq is more suitable for it now than it used to in 2003. The same way Syria now is under Assad, is equivalent to what it used to be in terms of authoritarianism on information. So yes, it all depends what you value. If you value safety, Saddam Hussein's time were much safer. But how did he keep it safe? By putting people in the gulag, the equivalent of a gulag. It's authoritarian safety. It's not like safety as in everybody getting along, but it's more like if you speak your mind, you're going to get killed. So of course you're going to get safety.
But you get a lot of pushback when you say that sort of thing, right? When you say that Iraq now, even though Iraq is obviously still a mess, and there was that brief moment, and I do want to focus on it a little bit, that brief moment where there were free and fair elections, basically free and fair elections, and the whole world saw it. But then the U.S. under Obama just pulled out just like that, and then things got much worse. But at that little moment, when there were the elections, do you think more people were thinking like you just said? Because I see you say this sort of thing right now, that America has sort of freed Iraq in a lot of ways. And then I see the amount of hate that you get from, usually, unfortunately, from the lefties.
As I grow older, quote unquote, is that I think is that even these fair elections at the time were not necessarily the best idea, because this is a country that was devastated by multiple wars. Many of the people are either sectarian or live in less education. So in a way, the fair elections or the elections has enhanced sectarianism more than it reduced it, because many of the people who were Shias, let's say, voted for Shia parties, and Sunnis voted for Sunni parties, and Kurds voted for the Kurds. So as I now think about it, is that democracy, which I think that's where I think the Iraq War has failed miserably, is that democracy is not just about elections. It's about institutions. It's about civil liberties. It's about all of these good education, good infrastructure. That was not. And that was not built, even though some may argue that was the intention of the war, but as you dig in more and you see the corruption between the contractors and the other contractors, and suddenly just the money disappears for some reason, which was all meant for kind of rebuilding institutions. That is, I think, what was really missing.
But do you think, were we on the path until we left? So you had the elections, I get what you're saying, it still could create a sectarian mess, because everyone's just going to vote for their own home parties, let's say. But were we sort of on the path and then just magically left, and then it
the withdrawal was, I think, even Democrats that I've talked to and who are supportive think it's a disaster. Is that, one of the things that the U.S., I was at the time in Iraq as well, is that the U.S. was doing there's a movement called the Awakening Forces, which are Sunni militias fighting against Al-Qaeda. It was kind of acting as a neutral force between all of these, because the Shias don't see the Americans as Shias or Sunnis, they see them as Americans. So, or vice versa. So the tribes, for example, the Sunni tribes were more willing to work with Americans than they were willing to work with the Iraqi Shias, because they think the Iraqi Shias are affiliated with Iran, which is their internal enemy. So in a way, America was acting as a kind of a neutral force that keeps all of these people together. And the moment that disappeared, which is from the withdrawal, which was amazingly unplanned, the Iraqi government, which was sectarian at the time, and in a way still is, immediately pulled out the funding from all of the Sunnis who were fighting against Al-Qaeda. So when that happened, immediately these guys who were fighting against Al-Qaeda started either becoming a target to still the sleeper cells of the terrorist group, or they were like, okay, what are we going to fight for anymore? So then suddenly ISIS comes up, What a surprise. So for those who actually followed Iraq from all of the beginning to the end, the ISIS evolution makes absolute sense.
Right, and there's probably a parable here to, in a way, what's happening right now with Turkey and the Kurds, that we were there. Maybe we shouldn't have been there. You can make all those arguments, but we were there, and now we moved these troops, and now Turkey's just slaughtering these Kurds, and it's like, all right, so maybe if we did try to go for good reasons, putting that debate aside, we were there, we know that the Kurds were basically our allies there, and now we've left just like we sort of left there. And
and now the Kurds want America's back to defend them from all of the other factions.
And is that our responsibility? And all of those are
I do think
questions to discuss.
I do think it is, I think people on, let's call it the liberal world, is that we have to support our fellow liberals, or people at least adhere to some. In Kurdish factions, there's communists and there are other factions that are there.
When you say liberal, just to clean it up, so you mean just basic Western ideas of freedom?
People who support freedom in general and adhere to women's equality and all of that. So there's a funny quote that's from a Lebanese poet. He said, Sunnis have Saudi Arabia, Shias have Iran, but secularists have nobody but God.
That's actually
so in a way is that if we do not support those who adhere to these values, at least some of them, in comparison to the others, I'm not sure that the YPJ adhere to Western values or Enlightenment values, but they are much better than some of the other factions. It's all by comparison. So if we're going to leave these guys to be slaughtered, then who do we have left to support? That is one of is that we need people on the ground.
The purely libertarian argument would be just get the hell out, let them do it, and that's that.
I always say is that the Middle East is the opposite of Las Vegas. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. So you cannot leave this region alone. It's for, I just came back from Europe and I see a lot of the refugees coming from Syria and other war zones. And this is an area that is the central, it's called the Middle East. It's in the middle of the world. And it is the birthplace of all the monotheistic religions. And its influence on, it's also one of the richest parts of the world because of oil and natural gas. And we cannot be left alone. The terrorists or the extremists are not the ones leaving us alone. So the thing is that if you say, I'm going to leave them alone, it is on the premise that there is kind of an agreement, a mutually assured destruction here, but there is not. When you have a guy who wants to establish a caliphate, and you're like, no, it's not my business, this is a bad deal.
Right.
But so, because the extremists are expansionists. The extremists are not going to be happy. Even ISIS, they were not happy with just, even though they get a large territory, but they were not happy with just this territory. They were willing to expand. They have ads about
they don't get to a border and be like, all right, we're good to go.
They are anti. Them and the libertarians have a comment in which it's a word that is borderless. Is that they see that their ideology is borderless, which is true according to their interpretation. So I think is that leave them alone policy, and also it's on what premise? America has intervened in the region, so it's just like you intervene and then you leave it in a situation that is
you break it, you fix it.
Yes, I do. And how to maintain all of that world order with all of, if you're not going to intervene, the Russians will, as it happened in Syria, and if you're not going to intervene, the Turks will, and which world order you want to live in.
Just very quickly on the Kurds, they basically have, the KRG basically has a state in Iraq.
Yes,
much.
In a way autonomous,
Would you just be for carving out that piece of Iraq officially and just letting them have that state? I understand that you still have the Syrian Kurds and the Turkish Kurds and the rest, but do you think as an Iraqi, do you think that basically would just be fine? It sort of is.
I think it all depends on what they want. There are arguments, and I'm happily an ally of many Kurds, and there are arguments on some argue that we have to stay as a part of Iraq, and some of them argue that they have to be autonomous, and because there's a lot of natural resources that exist in Iraq that they can rely on and benefit from, and also if you're going to form a state, you also might become vulnerable. At least now Iraq is a state of some sort, so that if there is a Turkish invasion, it still be a Turkish invasion of Iraq where it's a state versus a Kurdish state that they will be vulnerable. So
is that true though? Would the Iraqi army defend? You think if the KRG area got attacked, you think the Iraqi army would step in?
Yes, and maybe even the U.S. Army, right? I mean, the U.S. embassy in Iraq is the largest embassy in the world. So it's still there is a
right,
still
it's still part of the country,
there's still infrastructure that they can depend on. So I mean, I'm maybe this is me and an extremist agree on it, but I am for unity.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about international issues instead of nonstop yelling, check out our international playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.